All right, yes. So, imagining the Balkans is what we're going to do for the next 1 hour and 40 minutes. I'm very, very happy to be back here, back at Bookstan, the festival that is famous because there's always more people than chairs. And same is the situation today. We are here with MARIJA TODOROVA. Yes, give her a hand. Her book, Imagining the Balkans, has just been published in Bosnian now, so it's available for all and it's important for all. We'll discuss that, of course. Next to her is Ivan ČOLOVIĆ, and again, NERZUK ČURAK, GUIDO SNEL. My name is KEULEMANS. I'm honored to moderate this talk. Let me just check to begin with. Who has read Imagining the Balkans by MARIJA TODOROVA? Okay, it's 50-50. So that's good, and all the others can, of course, simply buy the book at Buy Book. One final practical question before we begin. Everybody, we will do this in 2-3 languages, let's say English and Bosnian, Serbian, whatever we want to call it. Sorry, Montenegrin, okay. So it might be the case that people need the simultaneous translation. Is it working for everybody? Because we all depend on the real hero of this afternoon, and that is Olvia, the simultaneous translator. Now, we've been brought together because now Imagining the Balkans is available to everybody here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is a book that has influenced us and I'm sure a lot of you over the years. It is as relevant as it was when it was published first in 1997. We will be talking about the question of the myth of the Balkans, the narratives that are here today about this myth or through this myth, and the impact of those narratives on the inhabitants of this region. And when I was discussing this panel before with Lamia Milicic, the excellent director of this festival, is Lamia here? I saw her for a minute. She'll be here, I'm sure. We discussed and we agreed that the value of this book could be to offer a way forward out of the current paralysis by moving away from the external and internal stereotypes and myths about the Balkans and its people. So we have serious stakes in play today. Ms. Todorova, just before I will introduce all the others as well, of course, beginning with you, you're a historian originally from Sofia in Bulgaria. Right now, people tell me that you have retired, which is of course not true, because you don't do retire. But officially Professor Emerita at the University of Illinois, where you've been teaching for a long time. Last year you were inducted in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is an honor. And when your book was published in 1997, I want you just to think back for a minute. What a different place the world was then, and what a different place this was then. Some of you weren't even born yet. others remember this city, this country, this region, 1997. That is why it's so incredible how the book remains its relevance until today. We'll discover that. You've been called the foremost historian of Southeastern Europe, and nobody here is gonna argue with that, I'm sure. And I have one fairly personal question for you to begin with. You dedicate this Bosnian edition to your dear friend Dubravka Ugresic, the great writer who passed away a few months ago. And she was actually here on stage 5 years ago at Bookstan. Why did you want to dedicate this edition to her?
Because I loved her, I love her, because she's my very dear friend. Because I miss her very much. Because she was a courageous woman. And also because with her death she spoiled our plans. We had a wonderful plan. She and I and 2 friends from Macedonia were supposed to do a tour in Turkey, and we were planning that for this summer. And so she passed away, and I really mourn for her.
Thank you. I think it's important to think about this brilliant, independent mind, thinker, writer, who was important to you as she was important to her readers here. It's difficult to move forward, but we will. I would like, before I introduce the gentleman here a bit further, I would like to ask you just one fairly simple question to begin with. Professor ČOLOVIĆ, you go first. Why is it important to have this book today available to the readers in Bosnia-Herzegovina?
Hvala, dobar dan, da kažem dobroveče ovde. Već sam čuo, dragi Krist, ti si rekao malo čas da je ova knjiga i dalje relevantna lektira za razumevanje i savremenih prilika na Balkanu. To dakle važi i za Bosnu i Hercegovinu. Ova knjiga je vrlo relevantna, važna lektira za razumevanje odnosa između ovih sila i nas na Balkanu i politike koja se danas vodi u vezi sa Balkanom i na samom Balkanu. Ali ova knjiga je, to treba reći, 6. prevod u zemljama koje su nekad pripadali Jugoslavije. Imamo slovenački prevod, imamo makedonski prevod, imamo 2 srpska prevoda, imamo hrvatski prevod i sad je Bajbuk očigledno čekao da vidi kako će proći svi ovi silni prevodi da ponudi bosanskoj publici i bosanski prevod. Tako da je to, ja s radošću vidim. Znači, jedini ko bi mogao da ga sada prevaziđe u ovom poslu je neki crnogorski izdavač, jer to je jedini jezik koji je još ostao da ova knjiga nije prevedena.
Thank you very much. And I think in all your modesty, you forgot to mention that you yourself were the first publisher in this region of the book in 1999, but we'll get to that later. Yeah?
Ne, nije to, da, hoćemo doći kasnije ili da ja počnem da pričam o tome, jer ja nisam skroman nimalo kad je u pitanju moj izdavački rad. Ja sam skroman kad pričam o sopstvenim knjigama i radu. Tu me malo ipak zaustavlja u toj moje sujeti neka ideja da ne treba preterano pričati o sebi, ali kad je reč o ovoj mojoj seriji o biblioteci 20. vek, moj je zadatak da hvalim tu biblioteku, jer ja hvalim autore te biblioteke, jel tako? Tako da je to za mene bez ikakve ograničenja, idem u reklamiranju sopstvenog izdavaštva do kraja. Hoćemo li da pričam kako smo se Marija i ja upoznali? Ne.
How you and Marija met, we'll get to that romantic story a bit later. So please hold your breath for a minute and we'll get back to that later. NERZUK, ČURAK. You, as a professor, political science based here in Sarajevo, may be better situated than anybody here to tell us why is it important that the book is available now in Bosnia.
Pa Bosna je srce Balkana, dakle srce balkanske zemlje i znate kao što krv pumpa od periferije ka srcu, treba vremena da dođe do srca. Naše izdavaštvo je u jednoj dugotrajnoj krizi, tako da možemo u tim nekim, kako bih rekao, krajnje prozaičnim stvarima vidjeti razloge zašto kasni ovaj prijevod, ali nikada nije kasno. Dakle, to je ono što je važno, imajući u vidu rat koji smo imali u posljednjim godinama 20. stoljeća sa jednom distancom od 30-ak godina, motriti Balkan iz zemlje koja je proživjela takvu katastrofu mi se čini jako, jako plauzibilnim i vjerujem, dakle, prvo jako sam sretan kad sam vidio koliko je ljudi diglo ruku da je pročitalo ovu knjigu, da negdje u Bosni kroz čitanje ove knjige da doživimo neki revival Balkana. Negdje smo mi, zemlje Balkana, izgubili Balkan. Ako da negdje bi, evo, možemo poslije o tome diskutirati, da se Balkan kao topos, kao mjesto vrati u našu svijest. Negdje je nestao. Evo. Zato je, mislim, dobro što se knjiga pojavila.
Thank you. Finally, GUIDO SNEL. He's one of the cool people in this room who doesn't have a thing in his ear because he understands all the languages here. Traveler, writer, professor too in Amsterdam. So you're very, very familiar with the regional context here. Why do you think it's important to have this book in Bosnian today?
Well, maybe I should hesitate about speaking about or for Bosnia, but I do recall when it was published in 1997 that it gave us, then as young scholars, it gave us a vocabulary to talk about something that was apparent but that nobody had put together back then. And what this was a really malicious set of stereotypes. And coming from Western Europe, as I was doing, being faced on a daily basis with these stereotypes by international officials, by diplomats and so on, but also by colleagues in the academic world. And what I'm hoping today, and I do realize that the book is available also in the other languages or substandards of the Serbo-Croatian language, Bosnian, but that it here as well will add to people's vocabulary, because I do think that all of us have been doing a lot of hard work in fighting these stereotypes, but you only need a very modest crisis like a couple of months ago, Kosovo, and you see all the old stereotypes coming to the surface again. And this is why the book is so important.
Thank you. MARIJA TODOROVA, let's go back to the book and the essence of the book, which you describe in the introduction to this new edition. And I would like you to read this fairly lengthy quote from the introduction. Here's the microphone. And take your time, because this really counts, so we need Ovia to be able to translate it correctly. Go ahead.
I never know what I've written, so it's good to read it, actually. So I have argued that the best way to understand the ontology of the Balkans is through the notion of historical legacy. This notion is intimately intertwined with the character of the Balkans as a concrete, historical, not simply geographic region, that is, as a space-time entity. Thinking in terms of historical legacies allows us to treat the region no longer as a static territorial entity. Instead, it appears as a complex palimpsest of differently shaped entities and different cultural spaces, which not only exposed the porosity of internal frontiers, but questions the absolute stability of external ones. In the narrow sense of the word, the Balkans are the Ottoman legacy. In practice, however, research of the region moves deeper in time as well as ahead, and in the broad sense of the word, the Balkans emerge as a complex palimpsest of consecutive legacies, which have territorially included it in different mega-regions from prehistory until today, as well as in different social and cultural spaces, not necessarily matching the regional demarcations.
I've read this passage from your book. No, I've read this book, passage from your book a number of times, and every time I feel like with the whole of your book, there is so much thought and knowledge underneath every sentence that you write. This is really extraordinary. Here too, to begin with, you say that if we want to understand the ontology of the Balkans, we could do it through the notion of historical legacy. Can you elaborate a little bit on that concept?
So I think yesterday I mentioned that the book was not conceived as this emancipatory project, which in the end it is, but it started out with this part of the last part on the ontology of the Balkans. And I had been thinking of how to speak about the Balkans as a whole region, and at first I was working with the concept of tradition. And especially my Turkish friends and colleagues were uneasy about this concept of tradition, because it is true that tradition is something that we choose from and we create, whereas legacy is everything. Even things that you don't want are part of the legacy. And also, for them, it was juxtaposing traditional versus modern. So I was thinking of what concept to choose which is not inhabited in history, and I thought that legacy would be the least, the most neutral of concepts. And of course I was thinking of the Balkans as a space, and of course Lucien Febvre, but mostly David Harvey, who thinks of three different types of space: absolute space, which you can quantify, and then relative space, where it depends on the position of the observer, and the relational space. And the relational space is the one where you cannot avoid also the processes, the change of time. So, I read David Harvey after I wrote the book, but I thought that my notion of historical legacy is precisely this time-space of his relational time. So this is a category that I liked being theorized by a person that I respect very much.
Which means that you do something out of the ordinary for a historian. You go into this space-time entity, which leads you to look at this region, as you say it, as a palimpsest of different legacies. Can you tell us a little bit how the Balkans are a palimpsest in this fashion?
So just two simple, I can give two simple examples. One of them is the Roman legacy, which, you know, this was part of the Roman Empire. Everywhere you have archaeological sites from the Roman period. But the Roman Empire was a mega-region which involved Europe from the British Isles down to Mesopotamia. But Central Europe and Northern Europe are out of it. So they are not part of this legacy. And then you have another mega-region, which is a contemporary legacy, the socialist or communist legacy, which involved all of Eastern Europe throughout the Eurasian space including China, including Cuba, and other socialist countries in Africa. So this is the way that you can confront this rigidity of the Balkans. So I was trying to find a notion where the Balkans are not reified. They are not simply the countries that are Balkan, but they are part of different megaspaces. And of course, if you add the Ottoman legacy, then you would have also the Levant inside. If you add the Byzantine legacy, same thing. So there are different types of legacy. All the legacy of capitalism and modernity, now it's part of this global realm of neoliberalism, right?
And it also leads you to become, I would say, political. Because you say, if we look at the Balkans like this, this exposes the porosity of internal frontiers, but it also questions the absolute stability of external frontiers.
Right, yeah.
So this is where your perspective starts questioning the fixed borders that we know now. And that is almost a political statement.
Of course it is. Of course. Well, absolutely, it is. Unwittingly, unwillingly, but yes, it is. Why is it a political statement?
And why are you making it?
Oh, because I don't mean it as a political statement. I mean it because when I wrote the book, I didn't like the ghettoization of the Balkans. And, you know, it was a moral outrage against all the stereotypes. Why is it political? Because it looks political, it's, right? I didn't mean it to be necessarily political, but...
And you also write it because you believe that the current fixed external boundaries are damaging to the societies here.
Absolutely, absolutely. At the time when I wrote the book, in fact, the question was whether Europe is going to accept Turkey. And I was very much invested, and I said, yes, Turkey should be in. It's finished now. So at this point, it is, you know, at least the Western Balkans have to be in, at least.
Okay. That being said, I agree.
Politically.
This perspective, looking at the Balkans as through the lens of the historical legacy as a palimpsest, this opens up windows here. This leads us forward, I hope. But the stereotypes and the myths, both from the outside and internalized, have been so, how do you say? Resistant, attractive, contagious, throughout the centuries, as you write in the book. And then, at the beginning of the book, you write, how could a geographical appellation be transformed into one of the most powerful, pejorative, so negative, derogatory, damaging designations in history, international relations, political science, and nowadays general intellectual discourse? How could an appellation like that turn into a pejorative? Now that's the whole book, but how did this happen?
Well, the important thing to know is that it happened slowly. It's not part of too many centuries. It happened only at the very end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. At this point, it's still very much of a living notion, especially the most important notion that derives from it, balkanization, to describe the disintegration of huge imperial entities like the Habsburg or the Romanov entity, which were called Balkanized after the First World War. So this is when the notion of balkanization was coined. So let me just tell you why it is. So just to give you another two examples which are not in the book. The notion of the Byzantine. So first of all, everybody knows that Byzantine is a neologism from the 16th century, when German scholars were trying to differentiate between the Eastern and Western Roman Empire. Nobody in Byzantium would call themselves Byzantine. But at first it was simply to denote a certain artistic type. And later on it became a synonym for too complex, hypocritical, clever, and it continues until today. For example, some would say, oh, you have a very Byzantine rhetoric, too complicated rhetoric. But nobody knows, in fact, that it derives from the Byzantine Empire. And another concept that the Bosnians might appreciate, the notion of bugger. The bugger, the English-speaking people would know the bugger is a term for sodomite. But it comes from the bougres in Provence, who were this Manichaean sect, which derived from the Bogomils, from the Bulgarians. So Bulgarian, bougre, bugger. So here you have something which nobody knows, that the etymology of bugger is Bulgarian. So it is completely dissociated from its geographical root. And I think this will happen also with Balkanization. Nowadays people are speaking, in America for example, oh, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are Balkanized. People who cannot make the difference between the Baltics and the Balkans and Bucharest and Budapest. But nonetheless, they're using Balkanization.
And as you point out multiple times, there is a real danger in that. Huh?
Yes,
a real political, social, economical danger.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. But it will pass, like all things, right?
I mean, it will pass. Yesterday at the opening night, you told us that, what's the name in cosmography?
Yeah.
Listen, I'm not an academic, yeah, so I'm intimidated by some of the people here at this. In cosmography, the centuries, the centuries are just 4 years or something.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
So in a few more
Oh,
cosmographic years, the Mediterranean Ocean, you said,
will become a mountain.
Will become a mountain.
The Mediterranean Rift.
Yeah.
And it will be Afrasia.
Afrasia, right.
Or maybe Europe. All of it. Who knows?
In any case, you are somebody who thinks about, long periods of time. So when you say it will pass...
Yeah, I know. I know. This is what all my scientific friends, chemists and physics, says. We have no, your thinking of time is awful. We are impatient. It has to be now. Well, yeah.
Okay. In the meantime, your neighbor is still holding his breath before he can... But, Mr. ČOLOVIĆ, I'm going to ask you to hold your breath for just a few more minutes. Could you pass on the microphone to Mr. ČURAK?
On ima svoj mikrofon, ne znam.
Ne dam mikrofon.
Some jokes are better not understood by Dutch guys. Mr. ČURAK, I will introduce you correctly now. You're a professor here at the Faculty of Political Sciences, journalist, essayist, publicist, well-known intellectual and peace activist. I was struck by two recent quotes I found from you about the current situation that this country is in. You say it is insulting how ethno-nationalist policies want to prevent the citizens they supposedly represent from constituting themselves as citizens in their own country. You also published last year a proclamation called Rebel, which is a call to citizens to express their resistance so that the political class will understand that after almost 30 years, this cannot continue to be only a country for politicians, but also a country for all its people. Crazy situation that you're describing, and I think a situation which has been fortified by the developments that MARIJA TODOROVA describes in her book. A question to you and then to Mr. ČOLOVIČ, the same. A quote from the book. given the inglorious coverage the Balkans have had in the West, what is the experience of being called Balkan? It is virtually axiomatic that a negative self-perception hovers over the Balkans next to a strongly disapproving and disparaging outside perception. This book emphasizes the extent to which the outside perception has been internalized in the region itself. Could you describe to us, as a person who lives and works here, in the heart of the Balkans, as you said, how this inglorious coverage, how this negative perception has been internalized?
Pa iz vanjskog ugla Balkan nema ontologiju, on ima samo negativnu ontologiju. Dakle, to je, ja bih rekao, nešto što frustrira i nervira, jer je Balkan postao neki apstraktni simbol nasilja, apstraktni simbol, naša gošća Todorova o tome sjajno pisala, gdje je hendikep heterogeniteta postao nešto što onemogućava konstituiranje uzornih političkih zajednica na Balkanu. Međutim, ja bih baš htio iskoristiti ovo naše druženje za jedan preokret u mišljenju. Mislim da je dosta više te produkcije o Balkanu kao nekoj statičnoj negativnoj metafori, koja je postala, dakle gdje je balkanizacija postala međunarodno priznat i referentan termin za fragmentacije i negativne stvari, gdje smo mi historijski prikazani kao loši ljudi. Ja ću vas samo podsjetiti na neke predstave putopisaca i novinara koji su dolazili recimo iz Velike Britanije, iz Sjedinjenih Država, konzuli iz Francuske. Sjećam se Simona Winchestera, britanskog pisca i novinara, koji je rekao da druženje sa Balkancima duže vremena, da će vas promijeniti kao čovjeka u smislu da ćete napustiti ljudsku normu. Dakle, onda je Robert Kaplan u svojoj poznatoj knjizi Balkanski duhovi daljnje razvio te stereotipe. Čak znamo da postoje relevantne informacije da je čak predsjednik Clinton nije reagirao na vrijeme da se zaustavi rat protiv Bosne i Hercegovine, između ostalog jer je čitao tu knjigu Roberta Kaplana, koja govori znači o nama kao mračnim ljudima, mračnim kipovima koje ne dodiruje moderna. To je strašno. A imate zemlje, imate dijelove svijeta koji su napravili puno brutalnije nasilje nego što je ikada bilo na Balkanu. Nije Balkan, nisu zemlje Balkana autori holokausta. Recimo, historijski, dakle, u smislu ključnog koncepta. Želim negdje, dakle, da afirmiram Balkan u punom kapacitetu tog pojma kako bi on izgubio tu, da je tako nazovem, negativnu ontologiju. Vidite šta se desilo. Dakle, intervencija međunarodne zajednice za okončanje ratova na prostoru bivše Jugoslavije, naročito Bosne i Hercegovine, je kasnila zato što ste mogli svakodnevno u medijima čuti priče o tome ako zapadni vojnici dođu na Balkan, upašće u vijetnamsko blato i 1000 ljudi će izginuti. To je sve zbog te a priorne predstave. Dakle, intervencija recimo u Bosni i Hercegovini koja je bila u avgustu 1995. i trajala 3 dana, ovoliko je bio broj ubijenih vojnika. Samo je jedan u saobraćajnoj nesreći izgubio život. Znači, te predrasudne predstave nisu fair, nisu korektne. Sada do Balkanaca je da to mijenjaju. Problem recimo sa Bosnom je sljedeći. Bosna nikada nije samom sobom proizvodila nasilje. Već je to negdje nju historijski konstituiralo kao neku mirovnu formu. Međutim, okolo Bosne su konstituirane nacionalne države koje su u Bosnu uvozile nasilje. I problem je bio što Bosna nije mogla da se odupre tome, nego je onda multiplicirala nasilje. I nastavila je, dakle, da to što joj je uneseno, da ona sama proizvodi. Mnogo je razloga za to, jel, sada neću u to da detaljnije ulazim, ali želim negdje da podcrtam, da se nadam da će mladi ljudi negdje voljeti Balkan, znači voljeti njegov sadržaj, da će negdje nastupiti jedna vrsta, volim tu misao Rudyarda Kiplinga, civilizacija, to je prije svega put, da će doći do jedne mreže puteva između balkanskih zemalja, da se počinju mladi ljudi međusobno upoznavati, da Balkan bude prisutan, a ne odsutan iz njihove egzistencije. A to sad radikalno nedostaje, budući da su tokovi mržnje, jeli, toliko narasli da možete čuti stravične poruke, stravične mimove, stravične grafite, jeli, a to sada treba negdje radikalno promijeniti. I da završim ovaj svoj upad. Dakle, etnonacionalističke elite su oduzele, one su kidnapirale Bosnu i Hercegovinu. Uzročno posljedično i u susjedstvu imamo slične elite i na neki način troše uobičajenu tradiciju, evo da upotrijebimo taj pojam, uobičajenu tradiciju Bosne i Hercegovine. Znate, ljudi, podsjetit ću vas na knjigu dvojice američkih autora, dakle da ne budem subjektivan, Tola i Dalbija, koji u svojoj knjizi Ethnic Cleansing and Bosnia Made govore o tome da je Bosna prije nasilja bila zbilja leopardova koža. 97% građana Bosne i Hercegovine živjelo je u mješovitim multietničkim sredinama. Samo 3% u monoetničkoj zajednici, to je zapadna Hercegovina. A samo su 4 grada, dakle 4 urbane konglomeracije imale većinu jedne etnonacionalne zajednice i to samo relativnu većinu. Dakle, to se nije moglo uništiti drugačije nego nasiljem. A onda su nam, i time ću završiti, onda su nam nacionalisti poslali sljedeću priču. Bosna nikad nije bila multietnička, Bosna je uvijek bila podijeljena, narodi su bili odvojeni, etc., etc., etc. Moje pitanje, ako je tako, pa što je izbio rat? Ako je tako, što će vam rat? Već ste imali to što ste željeli.
That is a killing question. Mr. ČOLOVIĆ, I'm sure you can continue on this. Thank you, Mr. ČURAK, for very vivid, thank you for this very vivid and shattering image, including the answer to what I asked you, how does the nationalist elite here internalize these stereotypes? And I'm sure, Mr. ČOLOVIĆ, you can continue on that. Just for the 2 or 3 people in this room who do not know Ivan ČOLOVIĆ, he's a political anthropologist, publisher and writer based in Belgrade. If you follow his work through the years, you will see that he's endlessly sharp and thorough reader of the Serbian political ethno-myth in all its platforms. So he studies graffiti in the street to what is being published online or being discussed in the political arena, all of that. Political symbolism, myth, rhetoric, propaganda, it is his responsibility that he takes to unravel. Just one example of the way he describes the working of this nationalism. The nationalist text serves to carry the reader like a missile to launch him into the heights of nationalist dreams and myths, and finally to throw him into the war. This was true when your book was published. This is unfortunately still true. And as you just said, one thing you are one of the many things you should be very proud about. You've always been outspoken against these kind of nationalism, violence and war. One of your platforms is the Library of the 20th Century, which you have been editing since 1971, bringing together authors from former Yugoslav countries about topics like the memory of communism, Europeanization of the Balkans, the course and consequences of the transformation we're seeing today, and yes, you were the first to publish Imagining the Balkans back in 1999. So, now that we know a little bit about your background, could you continue on this question of the internalizing the stereotypes, the vicious myths about the Balkans among the ruling class?
Da, probat ću da odgovorim na to pitanje. Najpre moram da kažem da ja nemam iskustvo da me je neko u nekoj zapadnoj zemlji nazvao Balkancem. Naprotiv, svi su rekli kako jedan vi ste tako jedan civilizovan, fini gospodin, sigurno niste Balkanac. Ali kad je reč o ovim prisustvu ovih stereotipih slika o Balkanu, o balkanizmu, kako to naziva Marija Todorova, tu se u međuvremenu dogodila jedna promena, kako balkanizma ili viđenja Balkana stereotipnog na zapadu, tako i ovde kod nas na Balkanu. U nekoliko tekstova Marija Todorova kaže kako je intervencija NATO snaga za vreme rata u Jugoslaviji i dolazak Zapada praktično na Balkan proizvelo jednu, kako ona kaže, neplaniranu posledicu ili više neplaniranih posledica i jedna od možda najvažnijih tih neplaniranih posledica je da je za politiku Zapada Balkan prestao da bude neko područje drugo, neki geto koji treba zatvoriti, izbegavati i proći pored, nego je postao prostor koji treba integrisati u zapadni svet ili u Evropu. I tako se u stvari ta promena se može nazvati da se sa getoizacije Balkana u mainstream politici na zapadu prešlo na integraciju, na politiku integracije Balkana. I ta promena se odrazila i na upotrebu, praktikovanje balkanističkih stereotipa i balkanizma i ovde kod nas na Balkanu. Jer uoči ratova u Jugoslaviji i za vreme ratova političke elite i kulturne elite su, posebno u Sloveniji i u Hrvatskoj, koristile balkanističke stereotipe da bi opravdali svoje projekte odcepljenja od zajedničke države Jugoslavije. I u Hrvatskoj i u Sloveniji se javljao argument: mi ne možemo biti na ovom prostoru zajedno sa ostalim balkanskim narodima, jer su to divlji Balkanci, a mi pripadamo jednoj potpuno različitoj kulturi. I došlo je do toga da se ta politika u stvari usmeravala prema debalkanizaciji naših nacija, Hrvatske, Slovenije i tako dalje. I u to vreme je naša koleginica Dunja Richtman-Augustin napisala jedan vrlo važan, značajan esej zašto se i otkud sramimo Balkana, i u tom eseju ona kaže kako je došla na ideju da o tome piše, a došla je na tu ideju tako što je slušala predavanje Marije Todorove u Zagrebu, predavanje koje ona održala pre nego što je knjiga izišla. I ono što je u tom tekstu Dunje Richtman-Augustin za mene bilo najinteresantnije, što ona daje neke primere, pa tako kaže, evo, uoči parlamentarnih izbora u Hrvatskoj 1995. godine, HDZ je istupao sa parolom Tuđman, a ne Balkan. I požalila se Dunja Richtman u tom tekstu kako je kino njene mladosti, Balkan, tako se zvao, promenio ime i dobio novo ime koje? Kino Europa. Dakle, stvari su se i tu umeđu vremenu promenile i kod nas, i iako tog nacionalističkog diskursa i tog otklona od Balkana ima i dalje, taj balkanistički diskurs je otišao na marginu i praktikuju ga još samo na ekstremnoj desnici i u Hrvatskoj i među Hrvatima u Bosni i Hercegovini. Ja sam tu video da se to otklon hrvatskog naroda koji je evropski, mediteranski, zapadni, od nekih drugih balkanskih naroda koji imaju potpuno drugu background kulturni, da to postoji, ali postoji isključivo na ekstremnoj desnici. Mainstream izbegava taj balkanistički diskurs. Mainstream politike na Balkanu se uzdržava, za sada bar, od takvog diskursa. I ono što je za mene bilo interesantan primer, koji se opet odnosi na kino Balkan, odnosno Evropa u Zagrebu, 2010. godine je Vladislav Bajac, pisac iz Srbije, objavio roman koji se zove Hamam Balkan. To je bilo novo vreme gde se znači moglo u književnosti i svuda izići sa temom Balkan. Promocija u Zagrebu Hamam Balkana se održava gde? U kinu Evropa. Mala osveta Balkana nad Evropom. To je meni bilo slatko i zato sam hteo da vam to pokažem. Dakle, ti balkanistički diskursi istrajavaju, tu su, ali oni su na svu sreću uglavnom marginalizovani. Uglavnom marginalizovani. Opet ponavljam i tu se slažem sa vama, mogućno je da će se tu situacija nažalost promeniti, jer je i to moguće. Ali za sada mi nemamo tu vrstu diskursa, u mainstreamu nemamo i ostaje znači samo, a ovo je to još da kažem zato što je to za Mariju Todorovu interesantno u tim nacionalističkim verzijama i varijantama balkanističkog diskursa, o tom negativnim stereotipima o divljem Balkanu i o potrebi da se njega rešimo, pojavio se i termin balkanizam u smislu balkanstvo. Znači, termin koji je ponudila Marija Todorova prešao je u politički rečnik, ali postaje sinonim za balkanstvo. Pa se kaže, evo kako ćemo se osloboditi tog jezivog balkanizma koji nas muči, kaže jedan profesor iz Ljubuškog, da sad ne citiramo do kraja. Ima jedna preduzetnica, pazite, ja to čitam na internetu, jer ja sam etnolog koji se dosta bavi terenom koji se zove internet i sebe sam proglasio internetnologom. Tako da ove primere koje vam iznosim nalazim na internetu. Pa tako tu nalazim jedna poduzetnica u Irskoj koja je došla iz Hrvatske, ljuti se u svom tekstu na radnike Hrvate i kaže im, slušajte, kad ste došli ovde u ovu civilizovanu zemlju, ostavite taj Balkan i taj balkanizam. Dakle, eto, staću ovde, vidim da me gledaš i otprilike dokle će ovaj da priča.
Kris, ja bih imao intervenciju nakon što Guido nešto kaže.
Sure, of course, because I think first Marija Todorova herself should respond to this. I was thinking what you thought about Ivan ČOLOVIĆ's observation that Balkanist discourse is being marginalized because of this shift from ghettoization to integration.
No, I totally agree with him. And in fact, I have to add Mitja Velikonja, who is a graffitologist, right? And he came out with a picture from Slovenia, from Ljubljana, to play like in the Balkans. So you have that in the graffiti. What I wanted to say for both of you, that it is not only a negative stereotype. It was a negative stereotype because of the disintegration of Yugoslavia and in Yugoslavia, because the Yugoslavs did not feel Balkans before that. In the Bulgarian case, from the 19th century, the Balkans, in fact, has a very positive stereotype. Because the Balkan Mountains, the ontology, is that all right? So the Balkan Mountains are in Bulgaria. It has a very positive stereotype in Bulgaria and in Turkey. For the Turks, the Balkans are the center of the Ottoman Empire. They love the Balkans. Nowadays, they are very active in the Balkans, as you know well. But for them, this is actually something nice. And in fact, it exists as a given name in Turkey and as a family name in Bulgaria. And there is an immense poetry, including in the former national hymn, about the Balkans as a synonym for courage, for independence. So it is not necessarily, yes, you have it in the elites, the acceptance of this negative stereotypes, but it does coexist also with a positive one. Yeah. So this is to historicize these things. Yeah. But I agree with Ivan that in Vienna I was doing a lecture and I was saying, well, here is, I'm a Balkanite, and then a lady came to me and said, but no, you cannot speak of yourself as a Balkanite. You know, you are so civilized, right? It's absolutely the same thing. Yeah, that's right.
Mr. ČURAK, you want to respond to Mr. ČOLOVIĆ?
Bugarska je unutrašnja zemlja Balkana. Dakle, kada sam govorio o negativnoj ontologiji Balkana, mislio sam dakle upravo na putopisce, žurnaliste, vojne konzule koji dolaze sa zapada i promiču jednu stereotipnu predstavu zatečeni naprosto novom kulturom. Čim je nova kultura, odmah je to stereotip neki, jel? Koji u stvari ostaje unutar nekog westerniziranog imenovanja kao nešto što je niže, kao nešto što pripada strasti, mistici, nešto što je izvan teorijskih modela i tako dalje. Ali vratio bi se na ovo što je Ivan govorio oko negdje napuštanja Balkana, jeli, kao neke stereotipne slike. Ja mislim da se to desilo iz dva razloga. Prvi razlog je vezan za unutrašnje nacionalističke elite koje nacionaliziraju svoje politike. I u tom smislu mi je to bitnije nego ideja Balkana. A drugi moment, dakle, došlo je do redukcije pojma Balkan na Zapadni Balkan. I Zapadni Balkan je postao kao neki tehnikus termicus, znači neki termin koji u stvari služi za proceduru ulaska zemalja Zapadnog Balkana u Europsku uniju. On je izgubio, reklo bi se, sve ove kulturološke zamke, nego je naprosto sveden na birokratizaciju. E sad, moja definicija Zapadnog Balkana je bivša Jugoslavija plus Albanija minus Slovenija plus minus Hrvatska. Zašto ovo kažem plus minus Hrvatska? Hrvatska, bez obzira što značajan dio njenih elita želi da Hrvatska nije Balkan, Hrvatska jeste Balkan, čak i kad ne želi da bude. Naprosto. Dakle, po puno kriterija, kulturoloških, ekonomskih, demografskih, komunikacijskih i tako dalje. Mi smo dakle sada svedeni na jednu inovativnu sintagmu Zapadni Balkan, koja ne znači, pazite, ja ne znam je li to figura inkluzije u Europsku uniju ili je to figura ekskluzije. Možda bi bolje bilo da je jugoistočna Europa. Iako onda nam nestaje taj naš prekrasni pojam. Dakle, negdje Balkan sada znači figurira kroz ovu atribuciju zapadni, pri čemu da nam bude jasno, to nije geografski pojam, nema veze, mi nismo zapad balkanskog poluotoka, nego je to u stvari politički termin kojim se želi naglasiti da mi pripadamo zapadu. Ja to na neki način podržavam, iako imam puno primjedbi na način tog uvlačenja Balkana u Evropsku uniju. Bojim se da ne ostane samo na nečemu što ja zovem strategija priključenja bez priključenja.
Thank you. So let's move to the Western perspective. Guido SNEL. Well, for the people who don't know Guido SNEL very well yet, writer, translator, associate professor of European Studies at the University of Amsterdam, where I also live. Novels, travels, writing essays. Tomorrow here at Bookstan we're going to discuss his novel Smrna Gora, which has been now translated by book. Beautiful, beautiful book. So come and join our discussion and buy the book. And also, which is not yet translated into Bosnian, but should be hopefully soon, 9 steden, 9 cities. A travel book, if you can say, a very unusual travel book from about Europe, from Vienna to Istanbul. So leading right through this city as well. And as a translator, you've done translations of, among others, Dasha Drndic, Alexander Tishma, Semezdin Mehmedinovic, Emir Suljagic, Danilo Kish. And I would like you, Ms. Todorova, if you like to... one second. Just to finish my description of Guido, short introduction from his book about the 9 cities, which is kind of very familiar, I think, to your way of looking. One of the aims of this trip, and Guido, you can read it from here, yeah? This is from the introduction of this beautiful, unusual travel book.
Yeah, in your translation, Chris.
In my brilliant English translation.
Yes. So, and maybe just a little bit of context. So this is the opening of the book, and I'm having a conversation here with a dear friend from Istanbul, a writer, Kerem Eksen, to whom I'm explaining the journey I am about to undertake, leading all the way to his city. One of the aims of this trip is to demonstrate that the Balkans do not exist, that it is a figment of the mind, a kind of European ghetto that we all made up together. When Europe dumps its historical waste, can live out its own dark neuroses and obsessions, so that it can shine all the more powerfully as a beacon of light, a benchmark of progress. And about that ghetto, we can then say, the Balkans, that's where time lags behind. It's still the 19th century there. They do not understand what democracy is, what human rights are. No wonder they had those barbaric wars there in the 90s, while we in Europe were at that time embarking on our historic integration project.
Ms. Todorova, it must be a pleasure to hear how influential you actually are on writers like Guido. Yeah.
It's the reality which is influential.
The reality. I would like Guido Snell to respond to something that you have written in your book. So if you could read this, yeah, because it follows logically here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So it would do much better if the Yugoslav, not Balkan crisis, ceased to be explained in terms of Balkan ghosts, ancient Balkans enmities, primordial Balkan cultural patterns, and proverbial Balkan turmoil, and instead was approached by the same rational criteria that the West reserves for itself. Issues of self-determination versus inviolable status quo, citizenship and minority rights, problems of ethnic and religious autonomy, the problems and limits of secession, the balance between big and small nations, the role of international institutions.
Guido, or Mr. Snell, I should say on this occasion. Mr. Snell, so this quote from Imagining the Balkans, this describes a situation where the West would treat, analyze, and operate within this region using the same criteria as we use for ourselves, instead of falling into that Balkanist trap all the time. Do you think this is happening? Do you think it's possible? Is there a potential for this to be done?
Of course there is. I mean, there was a time when it wasn't the case, and then Balkanism was installed, but we can also undo it. Mm-hmm. And I'm also really interested in the question how we can do this, and I'm really a believer in craft and discipline. So people should stick to what they can do best, whether they are publishers or translators or historians or anthropologists or politicians. One of the major things that that we have been trying in the literary field is simply by making literary translations available. So it is one thing to read in newspapers, in British, American, Dutch newspapers, speaking about the 90s here, about the war. It's an entirely different thing to read about the experience of the war from the writers from, for instance, besieged Sarajevo or the Srebrenica enclave. And it is up to translators to make a case for that literature. Now, you know, how literary translation has been faring is a different story, and I won't go into that. It has its own ups and downs. Georgi Gospodinov is now a major star, but you know, it's sort of, it's all up to fortune with, you know, who gets translated and so on. So, but I think it's really important also in the academic field, because, you know, in the first part of the conversation, when you were asking why is this political to Mrs. Todorova, I think sort of the degree of politics, especially in the discipline of history, is still under-recognized. So the very fact that a geographical designation such as the Balkans can be assumed uncritically as a parameter to write history is still very much there. And this is also why the book has been groundbreaking, because it applied postmodernist, post-structuralist logic to the writing of history. It also did something else, and that's why it's also inspiring. It also solved a problem for us postmodernists. So if you have to be critical all the time, how can you actually write history? How do you compose new narratives? And this is also what the book does in the last famous chapter, the realia of the Balkan, with the pun to Derrida. So, you know, this is what historians are doing, and what they also need to do. It's to actually reconstruct legacies, traditions, you know, whether it's with a focus on Ottoman history, whether it's like colleagues of mine in Amsterdam are doing, sort of, you know, mapping the sort of the really experienced Cold War world, you know, from Cuba to Mongolia to the former Yugoslavia. And in this, you know, in this city book, 9 Cities that I wrote, I've tried to do this in my own way by reconstructing what I call encounters. Because my idea was if you get away from sort of these, you know, these larger communities and this whole idea of, you know, you very soon end up in sort of ethno sort of delineations of community. But if you focus on individual encounters, you're simply face to face with another individual, and you do bring into these encounters, you bring in your language, for instance, and you bring all kinds of, you know, unconscious assumptions about this other person, but also something happens in the encounter that profoundly changes who you are as well. And this has been my experience ever since I hate to think of myself as you are describing me as a traveler, because that's another sort of almost Orientalist trope, like so this guy from the West embarks on a journey, you know, and after Vienna it gets really dangerous and so on. And that's what I've been trying to do in the book. And there's a whole, and also as a literary translator, these are also encounters, right? So to encounter someone like Semezdin Mehmedinovic, who is one of, you know, the first and foremost writers of and about this city, profoundly changed my understanding of what, for instance, what the conflict was about, but especially how the violence could be explained.
Yeah. Very true. I think it's very important, and I mean, that's why these kind of books are being published, these kind of writers are here. That is why you are here, to understand this. Every encounter changes both perspectives if you listen. Yeah?
If you listen. Yeah. And there's a whole, you know, the hordes of writers who do not listen. Yeah. And travel writing is notorious in that respect. Yeah.
I'll never call you travel writer again.
Thank you.
But you're one of the best travel writers I've ever... No, I'm kidding. Mr. ČOLOVIĆ, I think it's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. Throughout these shifts that you also describe, you published Marija Todorova's book in 1999 after this first romantic encounter, and then it was republished in several editions. And every time, of course, the situation had changed, the social, cultural, political situation. So I'm very curious to hear your story about how the book has been received over the years until today. Go ahead.
Da, ja sam posebno zahvalan organizatorima Bookstana što su me pozvali da učestvujem u ovogodišnjem programu, jer pre svega zbog toga što je to bila prilika da se Marija Todorova i ja posle više godina konačno vidimo, a u ranijem nekom periodu smo se mnogo češće viđali u Crnoj Gori, u Grčkoj, u Srbiji. Da. Najvažniji, u stvari, susret za ovde nas i za istoriju ovih prevoda imaginarnog Balkana desio se u Solunu 1997. godine i Marija Todorova je došla na tu konferenciju sa 2-3 prva primerka knjige Imagining the Balkans. I ja sam uspeo u oštroj konkurenciji da se izborim za jedan primerak i da pogledam posle u hotelskoj sobi šta je to, i onda sam dosta brzo, jer imam taj izdavački instinkt šta vredi odmah ščepati i uhvatiti, ja sam shvatio da je to izuzetna knjiga i da ona mora da bude prevedena i objavljena gde? A u biblioteci 20. vek, naravno. I tako se i desilo. I to dosta neočekivanom brzinom, jer već 1999. godine opet srećnim slučajem se Marija Todorova i ja susrećemo opet u Grčkoj, ne u Solunu, nego na jednom malom ostrvu Halki, u blizini Rodosa, i ja joj donosim prve primerke prvog prevoda njene knjige. Ona ne može da veruje. 99. godina, upravo se završilo bombardovanje Jugoslavije, ratovi na Kosovu, a mi u Beogradu proizvodimo knjigu. Zahvaljujući dvama prevoditeljkama, da pomenemo njihova imena, to je Aleksandra Bajazetova i Dragana Tarčević, koje su i prevoditeljke ovog izdanja. Evo, ja mislim da će se pre svega GUIDO sa mnom složiti da ne treba zaboraviti prevoditelja kad se govori o autorima i knjigama. Tako da je to bilo prvo izdanje i zatim je došlo drugo srpsko izdanje 2006. godine s jednim značajnim predgovorom, za koju ja i sada zahvaljujem Mariji što ga je za to izdanje priredila, gde ona odgovara kritičarima i primedbama koje su izrečene povodom prvog izdanja knjige, i to vredi pročitati i već zbog toga. Onda se 2015. godine u Hrvatskoj je objavljen prevod Imaginarnog Balkana, originalan prevod, da bi se evo sada pojavio 2023. godine i bosanski prevod. Znači više od 23, skoro četvrt veka, Balkanci čitaju Imaginarni Balkan. Znači to je najvažniji podatak kad je reč o recepciji ove knjige u našoj sredini. Znači ta knjiga je kontinuirano interesantna i ja imam čak utisak da interes raste, što je paradoksalno, jer obično kako prolazi vreme, interes za neku knjigu počinje da opada. Ovde se desilo da je takve okolnosti, da ih sad ne nabraja, su učinile da se publika i umnoža. Ova knjiga je naravno čitana i u originalu. Nisu svi čekali da je prevedemo na naše jezike da bi bili čitana, ali prevodi su učinili da ona ima daleko širu publiku nego što bi je inače imala i da postane popularna i, kako se sad to kaže, ja ponekad to čujem i za moja izdanja, kaže kultna knjiga, jer nezabolazna. Jeste. Tako da ja sam hteo da iskoristim ovu priliku. Marija, zadrži mi ovaj mikrofon samo za trenutak. Sad ćete vidjeti, donio sam jedan poklon Mariji Todorovoj. Ovo je, sad ću ja da pričam dalje, Ovo je jedna šolja koju ja poklanjam ovom prilikom Mariji Todorovi. To je ova slika nas dvoje od pre nekoliko godina. A s druge strane doneo sam i jedan poklon za Bajbuk. A to je jedna knjiga koju ne znam da ste uopšte čuli da postoji, jer ona postoji samo u ovom izdanju i na ovom jeziku. Dizanje prošlosti u vazduh je knjiga eseja, tekstova Marije Todorove, objavljena 2010. godine, jer sam ja ponet uspehom imaginarnog Balkana shvatio da bi trebalo objaviti još nešto od Marije, od istog pisca, i nagovorio sam Mariju, ona je prihvatila da napravi jedan izbor svojih eseja i tekstova objavljenih u periodici, i tako je nastala ova knjiga Dizanje prošlosti u vazduh. Naslov knjige je naslov jednog eseja u ovoj knjizi koji govori o rušenju spomenika Georgiju Dimitrovu posle pada komunizma u Sofiji i problemima kako srušiti tako veliki i glomazan spomenik. I evo, ja sam hteo da ovo ponudim Damiru, da nastavimo saradnju, jer ova knjiga ne postoji ni na jednom drugom jeziku, ne postoji ni na engleskom. Ovo je jedinstveno izdanje ove knjige. I zašto ne bi Bajbuk, gde je Damir, nema ga tu, uzeo da ponovi ovu knjigu u svom izdanju. Evo, Marija, ja tu sigurno će se složiti, ja sam tu. Damire, gde je Bajbuk, šta čekaš?
Yes. Yeah, I don't know. Is Damir Uzunović here? No, I don't think so. Is Lamia Milicic here? Okay, we'll carry the present to Damir later at Bajbuk. I would like you to continue, Ms. Todorova. This is of course beautiful, and it's very moving to see the two of you looking exactly the same as you do now, actually. A lot of things have changed, but you have not. One of the things that have changed, and this comes out of our discussions with Lamia before. Professor ČURAK is one of the people who insist that students here read your book, as you described before. And many of the students here think if there is a way out of the current situation, the paralyzing situation, the balkanization of our country, maybe we should look at the region through its colonial past. Maybe we should look at this region as a post-colonial region. Maybe that could be a way to progress beyond the national borders that we talked about before. I understand that desire. I understand the potential of that perspective. But I think you're very careful in placing this region under the colonial label and treating it today under the post-colonial label. What is your hesitance?
So unlike you, I understand it, but what did you say? You understand it? You understand the desire, and you are...
I don't know. Continue.
I understand the desire, but I don't think it's a way out. And I will explain why. I understand that young people nowadays like this notion of post-colonialism and also decolonialism, which one comes from the Indian subcontinent, the other one comes from the Latin American or the American, South America, because it is an emancipatory discourse. I have huge problems, and I will tell you why. First of all, theoretically, there is a misunderstanding between imperial and empire and colonial and post-colonial. And usually they are seen as synonyms, but they are not. And there is actually a very interesting theoretical discussion, which I'm not going to reproduce here. But just to give you an example, again, the Roman Empire was a colonial empire, but nobody speaks of the post-colonial legacy of the Roman Empire, because there is a distinct difference. Empires have been always there, but colonial empires are much more linked to modernity, and they have three aspects, and it is mercantilism, industry, and capitalism. So there is a consensus among theoreticians about these things. Now, what are the colonial empires? There are different categorizations about empires, usually maritime or terrestrial empires and so on, modern versus pre-modern. But in general, again, giving you an example, because I'm a historian and I like to give examples, it's neater to see it through examples. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was not, I think, a colonial empire because it did not have the characteristics of a colonial empire. First of all, it is a pre-modern empire. It did not have what is very typical for colonial empires, a difference between the metropole and the dependencies, and it is institutionalized difference. The Ottoman Empire was created in the moment of, in fact, conquering and creating a state with an imperial ambition. Secondly, it did not have this amelioration, syndrome of the, mission civilisatrice. It did not have it, except in the very late times of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the 19th century, vis-a-vis the Arab provinces. In general, it did not have it. And most importantly, there is no post-colonial residue from the Ottoman Empire. Nobody speaks Turkish except, the Turkish minorities. And unlike English in Ireland, if you like, which was a colony, or in India, or the French in China, etc., etc. These are not, but most importantly, there was not also this subjectivity of being colonial during the Ottoman times. The only people who spoke of a semi-colonial were the Ottoman elites at the end of the 19th century. They felt that they were dependent from the West. None of the others were speaking that. The others were speaking also nasty things. They were saying, oh, we are enslaved by the Ottomans, but nobody was using the colonial thing. And this explains also why among academics, post-colonial literature was not popular at all before the, until the end of the 20th century. Unlike, for example, world systems theory. Wallerstein was read very widely in Greece and in Turkey, and little by little it was coming also in the socialist world, but not the post-colonial literature. So if you don't have a colonizer, and if you don't feel colonized, why use this discourse? And I understand why you use it, because it's liberating. It's liberating, why? Because you are involved in a universal discourse. And that comes also, the shift to that was a famous article by Catherine Verdery and Sharma out of, it was called Post-Socialism, Between the Posts, Post-Socialism, Post-Colonialism, arguing that Eastern Europe, or our Europe, can be involved in a universal discourse. But to me, that means flattening what we have as a specificity. So I'm not saying that I should be rigid. I mean, I understand that people are using it. Of course, definitional rigidity is counterproductive. People have already dissolved notions like class or race or gender and so on. But if we do operate only with a single concept, we are not rigorous as scholars. It makes everything too simple, and so essentially you have different types of subjugation. It can be slavery, it can be conquest, it can be annexation, it can be just influence, it can be the Gramscian hegemony. But these are all different types coming out of a center and affecting provinces. And accordingly, you have different types of reaction. It's not necessarily decolonization, it can be revolution, it can be war, right? It can be different types of resistance to this discourse. But I think we should be specific and not just blanketly use these notions. So that's why I'm against. Also, because this notion is very much self-pitying and self-victimizing. Oh yes, we have been colonized by the Turks, and then by the Russians, and now by Brussels, and so it is debilitating, right? So I would prefer us to be very, very specific and to resist the specificity of what is against us.
Now I'm curious. I appreciate a lot, and I think it helps a lot to be this precise. Yeah? I agree on that. Now I'm curious, using your definitions, are we now witnessing a period when the Balkans are being recolonized by Europe, by the European Union? Is that something that we should be taking care of?
Well, again, I don't think that the notion of colonization works. I mean, Europe is a kind of, beneficial empire. It wants to be such, right? No, I don't think this is the case. There is subordination. There is marginalization, as Ivan was saying. Yes, there is marginalization. Nobody speaks now of the Balkans. People speak of corrupt societies and poor societies. These are the two adjectives which are usually, and corruption it's meaningless, because corruption very often is a way to get out of the predicament of poverty. There are actually very interesting anthropological work done about corruption on the lower level, which in fact allows people to survive. And nobody speaks of the high-up corruption, which is so typical of the West, because it is legalized, right? Because it is institutionalized. I remember a former Bulgarian prime minister who said, yes, we are corrupt, and now we are aiming to have a civilized corruption like in Italy, right?
Clear, very clear. I have about 23 questions, and all of you want to comment as well, but we are going to leave this space in about 10 to 15 minutes, and I would love to use this last part of the afternoon by getting your questions and comments, and then especially from, let's say, Lamia's generation, the people in their 20s, 30s, students, young academics, looking for the way out, looking at Ms. Todorova for guiding us. So please, go ahead. If you have any questions, the microphone is over there and we'll come to you. And thank you very much, because you don't look like you're 100 years old yet, so go ahead.
Well, I'm a student from comparative literature and information sciences. I used to study history and archaeology, and I had imagining the Balkans as a exam literature, but I wanted not to question but to comment. Recently I have been reading a book, I think in English it's still Sovjetistan, by a Norwegian author, Erika Fatland. It's a travel book through ex-Soviet republics in Central Asia. And while I was reading it, I find it interesting in the context about how some concepts that have been regarded in the West about the Balkans have been almost not the same, but maybe amplified, regarded about Central Asia by Soviet republics and then later the West and the British. And I was interested in about the existence of any comparative histories about Balkans, maybe Central Asia or other regions that have that similar context about them being associated constantly with some negative perceptions by other kind of imperial or just mega regions.
I read the book too. Did you recognize, because this is a total different part of the world, but did you recognize the fabrication of myths and stereotype about Central Asia that you see here?
Well, some parallels maybe in history with them being ex-Soviet and we being ex-socialist legacies about ancient history which isn't that archaeologically researched, and then being conquered by an empire while being medieval khanates, or I'm not that a big fan of comparing Balkan kingdoms the same as French, English, or European countries, because they have a different system with feudalism, but similar that they were conquered and their history was just integrated into the legacy of the empire that conquered them. The Central Asia being Russian Empire, Balkans being Ottoman Empire, and then later being into having a socialist legacy, and then having problems with reintegrating all the different legacies of the regions, and also the negative connotations that they had from either sides of the world around them. Also them being like called a meeting of the East and West, which can be considered a bit the orientalization and the exotification of a society that's supposed to be their own culture.
It all sounds very recognizable. Would somebody like to respond to this? Go ahead.
Hvala kolega. Mislim da je vrlo korisno pročitati knjigu Toma Rajsa, Orientalista. Znači, sjajno istraživanje. Mnoge odgovore ćete dobiti, to je priča o azerbejdžanskom čudaku Levu Nosimbaum, odnosno Kurban Saidu, gdje svi ti problemi orientalističkog diskursa mogu da se onako na jednoj personalnoj ravni, na najbolji mogući način da se razotkriju. Tom Rajs je dobio Pulitzera za to i baš preporučujem tu knjigu. Mnogo ima komparativnih elemenata onda sa Bosnom, recimo, ja sam to baš tako iščitao. Tako da možda je kako bi rekao, odgovor koji je u stvari velika slika. Orientalizam je naša sudbina. Sad kad to kažem, mislim dakle da je to komprehenzivni pojam koji, bez obzira što profesorica Todorova pravi značajnu razliku, da on u sebe uključuje i balkanizam kao diferenciju, specifiku, i da je to u stvari problem drugosti. I mi možemo stvari relativizirati, ali Zapad ima figuru drugog. I iz figure drugog, da ne kažem sad figure neprijatelja, ali iz figure drugog je nikao i orientalistički diskurs, niklo je, dakle, kako bih rekao, sve ono i negativno, ali naravno i pozitivno, jer mi prije svega želimo da budemo dio Zapada.
Thank you. Who else? In the back there. Microphone is coming your way.
Dobar dan, pozdrav svim gostima. Hvala vam na ovom prelijepom predavanju. Moje pitanje je gospođi Todorovoj samo i tiče se ovog prethodnog što je rekao gospodin ČURAK, s kojim ja se često u nekim stvarima ne slažem. Bojim se da postoji određena vrsta opasnost od zloupotrebe vaših koncepata. Da li ste primijetili te zloupotrebe za pravljenje određene ideje Europe kao onoga koji proziva Balkan za neku, da pravi u stvari te negativne stereotipe?
Is it? No, I'll keep this one. I'll keep this one. Is it clear you have examples of misuse of your concept?
No, I understood. Yeah, so hvala. I'm sorry I cannot respond in good Serbo-Croatian, although we speak Serbo-Bulgarian all the time, the two of us. There was a fear, even when I wrote the book, and especially among my Bulgarian colleagues, they were saying, well, yes, you criticize the West, but it will be taken by nationalists. No. You know, politicians don't like complex arguments. And this book is too complex. So they prefer to read, Kaplan and other things. So it has never happened. This book has been never taken by any of the right-wingers. And I continue to write now about socialism. So.
Finally, your opportunity. You have the microphone, so you're ready to go.
Tamam. Moje nekako pitanje, mislim za sve, može da odgovori ko hoće iskreno, ali zanimalo me to još jučer kada je gospođa Todorova imala promociju svoje knjige. Ovdje u Bajbku, nekako me uvijek zanimalo to smo i u školi dosta diskutovali. Kako je moguće za više od 50 godina je slavenski narode uspio za vrijeme Titovog doba, bio je jedan, nekako, moji roditelji i neki moji vršnjaci uvijek govore kao slavenskim narodima i balkanskim narodima koje je neko veliko pleme, je najbolje da ima jedan čvrst vođa. Mene nekako uvijek zanimalo kako je, da li je to istina, kao kada tražimo rezoluciju kod afričkih naroda koji su uvijek nekako razdijeljeni i tako, da li je potreban neki surovi, pa neću reći diktator, ali neki političar da bi spasio te neke međuplemensko-etničke odnose? Pravo lako pitanje, inače.
Do the people in the Balkans need a strong leader to save you from yourselves?
Nažalost, nisam raspoložen da preuzmem tu ulogu. Tako da...
Ništa onda.
Možda bih mogao, ali treba malo i raspoloženja. Ne znam ako me izviču na nekim izborima novim. Da, pa to je veliko pitanje, naravno, uloga pojedinaca, šefova, vođa, u raznim trenucima istorije, šta oni mogu da urade. Mi uglavnom imamo negativno iskustvo iz posljednjih decenija o tome šta su naše vođe umjesto nas i građana učinile. Tako da nam je dosta tih koji će zameniti institucije, parlament, građansko društvo i sve drugo da bi preuzeli vlast i vladali bez problema i bez tih prepreka. Da nema ništa, kako je govorio još davno jedan političar, neću da ima prepreka između mene i naroda. To je ideal takve vrste vlasti. Ona može da obezbedi u nekim trenucima privremenu stabilnost, mir. Ne možemo reći da smo razočarani što smo živeli u vreme Tita u Jugoslaviji kao stabilnoj i mirnoj zemlji. Ali ne možemo zaboraviti da je to bila zemlja jednog rukovodioca, jednog autoriteta, jednog sistema koji nije dozvoljavao raspravu. Da li da nastavim ili da stanemo ovdje? Bolje da...
You're opening up a beautiful next discussion. Our time here is up. I would say to your parents, read the book Imagining the Balkans, because it makes very clear that you should not give simplistic answers to complex questions, as you have made clear. I've deeply enjoyed listening to all of you. All your replies and comments and observations became kind of palimpsest of the complexity of the situation we are in. All throughout, I think this has not been a, how do you say, this has not been a depressing, heartbreaking, dark and suicidal kind of dialogue in all its complexity. What do you think?
I just want to end by saying that never in my life have I seen such an excellent moderator. Thank you, Chris.
that's totally irrelevant thing to say.
It's a complex answer.
It's a complex answer. No, I really believe so much in the value of complex conversations like these ones. I'm so happy that you were taking part and that Bookstan made it all possible. Go to buy the books. Join the other following programs: GUIDO SNEL, NERZUK, ČURAK, Ivan ČOLOVIĆ, MARIJA TODOROVA. Thank you so much.
This is true.